Ingersoll was seen and heard by more Americans than any human being prior to the advent of motion pictures and radio.
In nature, there are neither rewards nor punishments. There are consequences.
And he brought to popular religious dissent America's Freethought movement the greatest popularity it ever knew. Freethinkers honored their hero with books and collectibles. Admirers put his name to a chain of islands in the Yukon, a hot springs at Yellowstone, an entire Texas town. The Wajiak, Michigan freethinkers built a lavish theater decorated with the quarter-ton Ingersoll bust now displayed in our museum. Through it all, Ingersoll enjoyed a stellar legal career and a tender family life whose warmth and propriety frustrated his critics. Among his admirers were abolitionist and orator Frederick Douglass, pioneer feminists Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Matilda Jocelyn Gage, Cornell University co-founder Andrew Dixon White, and inventor Thomas Edison, who recorded Ingersoll's voice on an early phonograph. Robert Ingersoll returned once again to the region of his birth in October 1889, visiting Penn Yan, 6 miles west of Dresden, and lecturing to 8,000 people.
Ignorance worships mystery. Science explains it. One grovels, the other soars.
Robert Green Ingersoll died on July 21st, 1899 in Dobbs Ferry, New York. He was mourned by thousands, including personal friends ranging from industrialist Andrew Carnegie to socialist and labor activist Eugene Debs. Peoria raised a statue to him. In 1921, a committee led by Luther Burbank, Thomas Edison, and Edgar Lee Masters converted Ingersoll's birthplace into a community center. 5,000 thronged Dresden for its opening. With the Great Depression, the house fell into disrepair. Religious hostility, too, took its toll. One of the best-known Americans of the Gilded Age was vanishing from history. When 2 Rochester freethinkers restored the birthplace again, on behalf of atheist activist Joseph Lewis, only a handful attended its reopening in 1954. By 1986, the birthplace lay near ruin again.
The $7,000 special.
It was acquired and restored by the Council for Secular Humanism, America's foremost organization for the non-religious. The birthplace has been open to the public each summer and fall since 1993. Though Ingersoll lived here just 4 months, the birthplace is the only of his many residences still standing and open to the public. Enjoy your visit to the Robert Green Ingersoll Birthplace Museum, your window on the life and times of an extraordinary human being who made his mark on 3 decades of American life and is unfairly forgotten today. Robert Green Ingersoll, the most remarkable American most people never heard of.
Yes. I believe Robert Green Ingersoll actually visited Toronto one time.
Oh, actually, he came to Toronto more than once, but I don't want to anticipate too much of a later presentation. So, we're back here, and there we are. Well, if you came to visit the museum in Dresden, and we hope that many of you will this summer, you'd see something not unlike this. But first, let me tell you a little something about the house itself. It was built in 1800. It was built as the residence for Dresden's congregational minister. Ingersoll's father held that post in Dresden, and so the family was occupying the house in 1833 when Ingersoll was born. The house is composed of 3 sections. The main 2-story section in beige here is at the right. The pink portion at the left forward was actually built somewhat earlier in Hopton, a village about 2 miles west of Dresden. The village of Hopton failed, as villages sometimes did in those days. So one winter, its buildings were loaded up on sleds and pulled downhill to Dresden. And there it was added on to an existing building. So then the rearmost, the lean-to portion in green, was added on site. Now there's one more bit of strangeness. The front and rear portions, you can see they have different roof pitches. And if you follow the roof line very carefully on the left side of the picture, you can see where the angle of the roof changes very slightly. That's where the little house from Hopton and the lean-to addition were butted together. There's an additional strangeness, aside from this button not working. There we are. Sometime after Ingersoll's birth, the entire house was picked up and moved about 500 feet northwest, kitty corner, across an intersection. So the house is where Ingersoll was born, but it's not located exactly where it was when he was born. Where we think he was really born, there's a very nice manufactured house that I believe is owned by Dresden's Baptist Church, where Ingersoll is frequently preached against. But I digress. Well, by 1876, when the photo that you're not seeing was taken, come along, little machine, there we are. Ingersoll was a very well-known figure, a household word around the country, much admired by atheists and freethinkers, and listened to with respect by many others, including those who violently disagreed with him. Well, Freethought publications of the time often carried pictures of the Ingersoll birthplace, even though it was still being used as a minister's residence. Now here's an early postcard, probably circa 1910 or so. A few years before Ingersoll's death in 1899, the church at Dresden was reorganized and it no longer needed a minister's residence. So the house was sold into the private housing market. It had no running water, no indoor plumbing, no electric lighting, and in Dresden, circa turn of the 20th century, that was about par for the course. Well, after Ingersoll's death, the Ingersoll family purchased the house. In 1921, it opened as a community house with electric lights, still without running water or indoor plumbing. The house was open to the public for about 7 years. This is an interior view of one of the rooms where we now have the museum gift shop. Sometime before 1930, the money ran out. The house was boarded up and it began to deteriorate. Now this is Joseph Lewis, America's most visible atheist activist in the 1940s and 1950s. In the early 1950s, he determined to restore and reopen the birthplace. Now this photo from the early 1950s, let's try this photo, shows 2 freethinkers from nearby Rochester, New York, inspecting the shuttered house on Lewis's behalf. Now this is Arthur and Ruth Cromwell. Their daughter, Vashti Cromwell McCullum, would become the plaintiff in the first of the great 20th century decisions on separation of church and state before the U.S. Supreme Court. In fact, the McCullum decision had already occurred at the time this photo was taken. Well, Lewis restored the house and reopened it as a museum in 1954. It operated for about 6 years, and then once again the money ran out. The collection was dispersed to collectors all across the country, and the house began to deteriorate.